The Denver Broncos and Sean Payton have a multitude of options when they're on the clock at pick number 20, but we'll tell you why the Broncos need a first-round wide receiver here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Thanks so much for tuning in, making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. And it's easy to become an everydayer. All you have to do is hit that subscribe or that follow button, and you're never going to miss out on what's going on with your favorite team. For all your Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more every single day, all year long, you get that here. Locked On Broncos, the best Broncos podcast that's out there in the entire pod sphere. As always, I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, longtime site expert over there at predominantlyorange.com. And today, we're going to bring you a jam-packed episode leading us into the NFL draft. We'll discuss why the Denver Broncos need a wide receiver in the first round of this year's NFL draft as we open up our mailbag here. We'll also tell you about maybe how the Broncos could invest in a cornerback in round number one. It may not be the popular option, but anything is on the table at this point. And then we'll share our reaction to the latest 3-round mock draft put together by Field Yates over there at ESPN.com. Sayre, my friend, look, you and I, we've been in this business a long time, and we talk football for a living. You obviously do a lot of stuff at church. I'm sure you get people coming up to you all the time asking you your thoughts and your questions on what do you think the Broncos are going to do. Here, I get it all the time with our friend group. But the one person who asks me the most questions as of late regarding the NFL draft happens to be my fiance. And I know your wife actually asked you this question, which is going to kick off our mailbag here today. Per sources, somebody said that she asked you, do the Broncos need a first-round wide receiver?
I know my wife is just all about, building around Bo Nix right now, Cody. She's wondering, how are the Broncos going to do it? We got the tight end, we got the joker, but she wants a wide receiver. And I keep on saying this to everybody, Cody, that we don't have that at home right now. We don't have it. When you're talking about first round wide receivers, you mentioned it. I think you and I agree. The Broncos need a wide receiver. It's not a wide receiver or bust in the first round, but I think if they take one in round one, it's way less of a luxury. My wife's been asking me about this for so long. I finally posted it on my Twitter page, just asking Broncos Country, do you see wide receiver as a luxury want right now, or do you see it as a need for the roster? Most people, I'm surprised to find out, Cody, it seems like the majority of people that are jumping in my mentions are saying that wide receiver is more of a luxury at this point. And the reasoning that they're giving is, hey, we have Courtland Sutton. Sounds like a deal is going to get done with him. Got Devaughn Vele and Troy Franklin, expecting them to break through in year two. And Marvin Mims' second half resurgence last year really gave the fans a lot of confidence that wide receiver is not a position of quote unquote need in round one. However, I would highly disagree because the Broncos were one of the worst teams in the NFL last year when it came to dropped passes. I don't think they should bank everything on Vele and Franklin because we saw how that worked out with Greg Dulcich, the last couple of years when you banked everything on his development and thought, well, surely, in Sean Payton's offense, he's going to be able to figure it out. Surely with, a better quarterback, he's going to be able to figure it out. I just think you can't necessarily bank on that, and there's no reason why a position that commands $40 million a year at the top of the market, why you wouldn't take a player at that position if he was maybe the best player on your board. It's definitely a need, in my opinion.
No, I'm 110% with you. I think it is a need here for this franchise. And look, to the point that you made right there, I think a lot of people are comfortable saying, hey, we're going to go into the season with Courtland Sutton, Devaughn Vele, Troy Franklin, Marvin Mims. We're good to go. That's all we need. But you have to always throw this out there. Like in the NFL, as a front office executive, I'm going to give people the mind of thinking here for a head coach and a general manager. What if there's an injury at training camp? What if there's an injury in the preseason? What if there's a week 2 injury? Are we okay with going into the season with that wide receiver room as it currently is? And, we all know the Broncos typically carry 5, sometimes maybe 6 wide receivers on the 53-man roster. But You are an injury away. And obviously, like if you have an injury to Cortland Sutton, knock on wood, that hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully there's no injuries and this team can continue to stay healthy. My whole line of thinking is you're going into that with saying like we're almost banking on the fact that these guys are going to have a drastic jump in their production, which I anticipate. I know they think that for Troy Franklin. I know Devaughn Vele is excited about being able to do a little bit more, but I think from an overall peace of mind, security type of feel, you don't have that if you don't take a wide receiver in this year's draft. And I'm okay with them going wide receiver in round 1. Yeah, round 2, I'm okay with that as well. But I don't think you can go into this draft and not take a receiver because that room still has to get better around Bo Nix. And of course, adding Evan Ingram is going to help. If they add a tight end, I'm certainly not opposed to that. That's certainly going to help as well to combine there and, maybe a potential lethal 2 tight end set. But wide receiver, this is a position, Sarah, as you mentioned, you need some flexibility with it going forward as your other guys start to get into their role a little bit, right? And I know that Troy Franklin, Marvin Mims, their roles are going to be entirely different than what the Broncos have planned for Cortland Sutton, Devaughn Vele, A.T. Perry, and whoever else they decide to bring in the NFL draft. I absolutely agree. I think the Broncos need a wide receiver, and round 1 seems like the best bet here for them. Me, I'm on the Emeka Egbuka train, and I know there's a couple other guys we talked about. We just had a mock draft a couple of days ago. We had Jaden Higgins in round 2. He might be a late round 1 guy.
Yeah, I think so. And I would not be surprised by that. I wouldn't be surprised by a lot of things at wide receiver in this draft. I think the thing about this draft class is that there's not a lot of blue chip talent. Now, Travis Hunter, he is that at wide receiver. But other than Travis Hunter and maybe a couple of other guys, there's not a ton of players that I would say these guys would be consensus top 5 players in just about any given draft. This is not a top heavy draft. It's a deep draft. And so the Broncos could get really nice value at wide receiver outside of round 1. That's where I think there's this splitting of hairs between, well, is it a round 1 need or is it round 2, round 3? You play this, puzzle game of, Sudoku trying to figure out, okay, if the Broncos go running back in round 1, they could go any position, rounds 2 and beyond. If they go D-line in round 1, now they've got to pretty much have to take a running back round 2, right? So it pushes everything in weird positions. I don't know. You don't necessarily have to do anything in the NFL draft, but certainly for what makes sense, I think with one of the top 3 picks in this class, the Broncos got to come away with a receiver, right? I mean, it's got to be prioritized in that way so as to say, hey, with one of our top 3 picks, we feel like we're getting a guy that can contribute right away, because that's what this team needs, is a receiver that can contribute right away. Whether it happens round 1, 2, 3, I don't care. But I think in one of those 3 picks, they've got to get a receiver.
Well, and it's not an indictment on any of the other receivers on the roster either. If that's the move, you're always looking to upgrade your roster, right? Because what's the most important piece for your franchise? You got your quarterback in place. Now it's getting him the right pieces around him that are going to help him continue to take steps forward here. I think we easily forget the Broncos wide receiver situation last year when it came to injuries, right? Week 1, Devaughn Vele sees a healthy share of targets, suffers a rib injury. He's out of the mix for a couple of weeks. Josh Reynolds gets hurt against the Las Vegas Raiders with a hand injury. The Broncos lose out on him. And then we're sitting here saying like, what does the wide receiver room look like? Who's going to step up? Who's going to get looks? And certainly the Broncos, they went on a little bit of a streak. We're not saying that, but the wide receiver room had left a lot to be desired through a good portion of the season outside of Cortland Sutton until Marvin Mims really came along. So are we okay with sitting here saying, let's go with the status quo? Like obviously the Broncos, they took a step forward. Cortland Sutton was a big part of that. Marvin Mims, we loved what we saw from him. We saw the flashes from Troy Franklin. Is that enough to go into 2025 and say, you know what? We're comfortable with running it back as is? I always think the smart thing to do from an executive standpoint is to add that insurance policy while also making that room better. You have to in today's NFL. And how many episodes did we do last year throughout the season saying, wow, in a situation like this is where it would have been nice to have a guy like Tim Patrick in the mix. Because remember, there was a game where Josh Reynolds, I think it was early on, I think it was against the Seahawks. Week 1 is like, wow, Josh Reynolds had an easy drop, a wide open drop on a 4-yard out route. Little Jordan Humphrey had a drop. We were sitting here saying the Broncos need something to inject some life or just to keep them floating at the receiver position. I'm not comfortable with Denver just running it back as is. And obviously, we want to see A.T. Perry. No one's saying we don't. But A.T. Perry was a practice squad guy, has some regular season experience with the Saints. But aside from that, we don't know exactly what he's going to fully bring to the table yet. We know his traits. We know what maybe he can do, but we haven't seen it just yet. So banking on that would be, as you say, roster malpractice, my friend. Broncos country, we want to know your thoughts. Do you think that the Broncos need a first-round wide receiver, or is it a luxury want as we are posing out there, as our wives have told us and asked us these questions on today's mailbag episode of Locked On Broncos? We're not done yet, Broncos country. Still got a lot to break down. We got a very interesting question sent in from a mystery mockster asking whether or not the Broncos could take a cornerback in round number 1. We'll tell you why that would not be the popular pick here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is brought to you by our friends over there at LinkedIn. And as a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Job comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in.
And LinkedIn, they make it easy to post your job for free. They share it with your network, and you can get qualified candidates all in the same place.
And it's easy. And here's how it works. You post your job. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires.
Just post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We've been talking so much about the Denver Broncos getting better hands on offense. How about adding some more hands on defense? Another playmaker at cornerback visited the Denver Broncos and maybe raising the possibility of a first-round cornerback here in the 2025 NFL Draft, which is just a week away, Broncos country. Kind of crazy to think that we've already come this far. And we're so thankful for every single one of you that rocks with us every single day here at Locked On Broncos. If you're not already a subscriber, if you're not already an everyday listener, go ahead, become one right now. You can just take a couple seconds, hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as on YouTube. Cody, very shocking news broke on Tuesday of the Denver Broncos hosting a cornerback who is a projected first-round pick in the 2025 NFL Draft for one of their top 30 visits. Broncos, as of Wednesday, are no longer allowed. This is the last day to have the top 30 visits before the draft. So they snuck one in at the buzzer here. And we had Mystery Mockster ask us the question because Mike Kliss reported Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky, the ball-hawking corner, came in for a top 30 visit. The Mystery Mockster is asking, is cornerback a realistic position for this team in round 1?
I would be shocked if that was the case. And look, anything is possible in today's NFL. And I think certainly everyone wants to go back to the Cincinnati Bengals game and say, okay, hey, like, what does that look like when you're facing two elite level wide receiver ones? You had Pat Surtain covering Jamar Chase, T. Higgins from time to time. Riley Moss primarily covered T. Higgins and had a rough game despite having really tightly contested coverage there. I think bringing in a corner, a potential first-round corner for a top 30 visit, I think is interesting. But is it on the table here for round 1? Like, I'm very curious what that visit was for. What are the Broncos looking to find out here? Because, look, as we have all seen from George Paton, I think you go back to 2021, his first draft as general manager of the Denver Broncos. And, look, obviously Vic Fangio was the head coach. But a lot of people were saying the Broncos need a quarterback. They need Justin Fields. And everyone was shocked. I wasn't shocked. I thought it was a great pick. You and I have talked about this, about, when they went with Patrick Surtain. I was like, man, that's a game-changing cornerback right there. And certainly look at how that has aged. He has become he's already on track for a Hall of Fame career. Defensive Player of the Year. He means so much to this Broncos franchise. Would the Broncos maybe do this possibly again here in the 2025 NFL Draft by shocking everybody, going, with a pick that maybe they didn't foresee anyone maybe going? Everyone's talking offense, but could corner be the secret sauce on defense? I don't know how George and Sean feel. Obviously, on Thursday, we'll have our pre-draft press conference with them, and maybe we'll get a little bit of insight into that. I know the Broncos are happy with their cornerback room that they currently have, but I'm very curious as to why they were looking into a cornerback here, obviously in the top 30 visit. Are they trying to maybe see what other teams have met with this player? I'm not sure where to go here, sir. I mean, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of stats that really stand out to me, Cody. And the number one stat that stands out is targets. You know, with Patrick Surtain, you're not throwing to that side of the ball very often, right? I mean, 62 targets in 16 games last year, and Surtain made teams pay. It was the lowest quarterback rating into his coverage that he's allowed as an NFL player at 58.9, lowest yards per target at 5.3. I mean, you name it, basically, he dominated. Yards per completion, his career average yards per completion, Cody, is 10.7. Last year, it was 8.6. So we're talking a 2 yards difference there. Throwing it at Pat Surtain is fruitless in today's NFL. So what do? You throw at the other guy, right? Riley Moss in 14 games. Listen to this stat here. In 14 games, Riley Moss was targeted 103 times. That is bizarre. I mean, their teams are throwing at Riley Moss ad nauseum, and we saw that happen in the Cincinnati Bengals game, right? And the fact that he missed 3 games and was still targeted 103 times is bonkers. And so that, I think, is why the Broncos might look at a guy like Maxwell Hairston, and I'm not saying he'd be the only option, but it's maybe a reason why you look at a guy who, over the course of his last 20 games at Kentucky, had 6 interceptions and 3 forced fumbles. This guy breaks on the ball quickly. He's instinctive. He's got great hands. And 3 of those 6 interceptions, Cody, they were taken back for touchdowns, right? So this is a player who, remember in 2014, the Broncos they just loaded up at corner. They're like, you know what? We're getting Aqib Talib. We re-signed Chris Harris Jr. We're bringing him back. We're going to go ahead, use our first round pick on Bradley Roby. We're going to kill this cornerback need with fire. And they did the same thing in 2021, the year they brought in Pat Surtain, right? You signed Kyle Fuller, you signed Ronald Darby, you had Bryce Callahan already, and then you use a first rounder on Pat Surtain. I don't know. I think that most NFL teams nowadays subscribe to this idea that you can never have too many corners, especially when you have someone like PS2 demanding that you throw the other way.
Well, and I think the scary thing about it is now, like, you see scouting reports, you see draft profile talk, and everyone's trying to find the next Pat Surtain. That's a really cool thing to kind of be in that light of that conversation. But obviously, Travis Hunter is a very, very special player. I know he's going to obviously go in the top 3, maybe even top 2 at this point, in the NFL draft in a week or so. Will Johnson's another name as well as cornerback. The Michigan guy, cornerback, who obviously suffered an injury. A lot of people were talking about he's got a lot of traits similar to Pat Surtain. Obviously, with his injury, does that maybe push him down a little bit to where, hey, the Broncos actually might have a chance to get a corner like a Will Johnson? Could it be a round 2 pick? Like, if he drops to round 2, could the Broncos maybe make a move like that? I think in today's NFL, with how many wide receivers that teams will utilize, Kansas City has been one of them. Cincinnati obviously is one of those teams that does it. You need to be able to have guys that can cover. Now, obviously, in terms of volume of targets that Riley Moss saw, that doesn't mean that Riley Moss is bad in any way, shape, or form. It means that teams just don't want to risk throwing it in Pat Surtain. There was at one time, there was a stat that was trending that quarterbacks would actually have a better passer rating if they threw it in the dirt versus throwing it towards Pat Surtain's way. I don't know how the math and the calculations kind of came out to that, but that's a pretty wild stat in and of itself. Now that he's your reigning, defending, undisputed defensive player of the year, what does that mean going forward? Well, whoever's playing cornerback, you're going to be getting a lot of targets because teams aren't going to want to throw it to Pat Surtain's way. And the thing that the Broncos made the big change up this season versus what they didn't do in Vance Joseph's first year, they were playing Pat Surtain off the ball quite a bit in 2023. They didn't allow him to press as much. And that was more so a scheme thing. Whereas Pat wanted to do those things. And then because they brought in the right pieces and they evolved the defense a little bit, 2024, we saw Pat Surtain can lock guys up. Let him play press coverage. Let him run with those guys. I think having Jim Leonard was a big factor in terms of saying, hey, like, we can do this. Like you got Pat Surtain. He's an absolute freak. He's the perfect technician at that position. So for me, Sayre, I know the idea of maybe picking a cornerback is not going to be popular amongst Broncos country. I don't think it would be the right move, but I could see why the Broncos could in fact do that if that were the case in round number 1. Could you imagine the reaction on social media if that happens? Anything is possible, though, Broncos country. We want to know your thoughts as well. How would you feel if Denver selected a cornerback with their first round pick here in the 2025 NFL draft? We still got a lot to break down on today's mailbag episode, Locked On Broncos. One Broncos fan sent in a question asking us what our thoughts were on Field Yates of ESPN.com's his latest mock draft that included a little bit of an offensive haul for the Broncos offense. We'll tell you our thoughts on that and much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by FanDuel. And hey, the NBA playoffs, they are almost here. In fact, my Chicago Bulls play Wednesday night, and FanDuel giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you're going to get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins.
FanDuel makes it so easy for you to get in on the action, especially as the playoffs are here. There's no better time to get in on all the action than when the postseason tip-off begins. And the Denver Nuggets are going to be playing the Los Angeles Clippers this Saturday. And right now, they're the series favorite here early on at FanDuel Sportsbook. But they're going to allow you to go into any playoff matchup that you see, and you can put together a same-game parlay where you can choose player points. You can choose who's going to hit a certain amount of three-pointers. You can even decide on who's going to score the first basket of the game and the method in which they score, whether it's a free throw, a layup, a slam dunk, or a three-point shot. All inside the FanDuel Sportsbook app. They want you to get ready for the NBA playoff push here inside of their app. So don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. The fourth quarter action of today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is here. And as always, Broncos country, our promise to you, the avid members and listeners out there, we're here for you every single day, all year long, for all your Broncos news, content coverage, analysis, and more. You're not going to get a more objective point of view on everything happening with your favorite team than right here. Locked On Broncos, become an everyday if you're not yet one already. Sayre, our mailbag, we love to open it up. We got an interesting question sent in. You know, sometimes like we'll react to people's mock drafts essentially, but as you get closer, I know the ESPN and NFL Network, they're doing a lot of crossover stuff right now. I know there's a lot of things trending towards a potential partnership, or obviously ESPN buying NFL Network possibly, but they have a lot of analysts, a lot of draft analysts. Field Yates recently came out with a very interesting haul here, and his latest mock draft, just a week away from the action, where the Broncos, they focus on the offensive side of the ball. But they get some interesting players here in rounds 1 through 3. What were our thoughts on that? First off, you know, who were the 3 picks here for Field Yates' mock draft?
Yeah, I really found this to be an interesting exercise. Field Yates alternating picks with the great Mel Kiper Jr., who shockingly released his final mock draft like 2 weeks before. I was interested by that, Cody. Normally, no NFL draft experts are releasing a final mock 2 weeks out, but I guess Mel Kiper Jr. is calling out his shot from, full court. But this mock draft had the Broncos taking Omarion Hampton, the running back from North Carolina, in round 1. I saw that Hampton recently did an interview with Shannon Sharpe where he kind of vocalized that he didn't think he was even going to be there at 20 overall. So we'll be interested to see if that happens. Second round pick was Mason Taylor, the tight end out of LSU. You and I have talked about how he could be one of the perfect potential fits for the Broncos in this year's draft at tight end. One of a number of really young guys at that position who makes a lot of sense as a pass catching option and developmental joker. And then in the third round, Alec Eomanor from Stanford, the wide receiver. I'm probably butchering his name. Cody, I'm not as up on the draft prospects this year as I normally am. I need to learn pronunciation for a lot of these names, but I know that the Stanford wide receiver is a big dude who can make plays down the field, who's physical, aggressive. So I think overall, this would be a very interesting and maybe borderline ideal haul. I don't know that after those first 2 picks, I don't know that you could do anything that would disappoint me after getting Hampton and Mason Taylor in rounds 1 and 2.
Yeah, I know it doesn't contain, unfortunately, any of the Ohio State Buckeyes that you and I have kind of
Yes.
been pounding the table for. Obviously, you want to pluck players off of a national championship squad. That's always something you want to do. But obviously, Ayo Minor out of Stanford, like I said, got to get a pronunciation guide here. His best value in terms of his stock there as an under the radar guy probably is his game against CU 2 years ago, where he absolutely went off and had a ridiculous game against Travis Hunter. Guys, we mentioned is going to go top 2, top 3 in this year's NFL draft. Obviously, you talk about maybe he's able to do in his 2 years at Stanford. In 12 games, in back-to-back years, he had 62 catches his first year, 63 catches in 2024. He had 1,013 yards in 2023 with 6 touchdowns. He had 831 yards and 6 touchdowns. So his overall receiving numbers dipped a little bit here in 2024, but really he's kind of the same productive guy. 6 touchdowns. Obviously, in each of the last 2 years, it's 12 overall TDs. For me, I look at where he's at. I think he was number 9 overall in the ACC in 2024 in overall receptions. In terms of receiving yards, he was number 7 in the Pac-12 in 2023. He was number 8 overall in the ACC in 2024. And then obviously he was number 7 overall in 2023 in the Pac-12 in yards per reception, averaging 16.3 yards per catch. Kind of, I think if you're getting him in round 3, that's a guy that's going to come in and is going to compete with guys like Devaughn Vele. And obviously, as we talked about, A.T. Perry for at that wide receiver spot there, for a sizable guy, you want that. And you pair that guy next to Courtland Sutton, or you factor these guys into the rotation. I certainly wouldn't be opposed to that. I'm not sure that would necessarily be something like if this was the haul for the Broncos. I don't know if I'd be as excited about it in terms of 3 picks versus some of the 3 picks that we've done in some of our various mock drafts, right? Like if you get Omarion Hampton, Mason Taylor, Ayo Minor out of Stanford, I don't know if that's as strong, at least on paper, in my opinion, as getting like, okay, let's say you did get Omarion Hampton. You got round 2, a Jaden Higgins or a Travion Henderson, whatever it may be, and then a Terrence Ferguson in round number 3. Like for me, I feel like those would be better picks than this haul for the Broncos. What did Mel Kiper have as his by chance? Do you know that? I don't subscribe to ESPN Plus, so I don't have access
No, I
to
don't
that.
either. Yeah, I don't either. I don't remember what Mel had for the Broncos. I think it was for some reason I want to say it was similar positions, in what we have here in this mock draft. So I feel like it's kind of trending that way in terms of what people are thinking the Broncos are going to do. I know Mike Kliss posted a mock draft a week or so ago, Cody, where he had the Broncos going D-line in the 2nd round. So maybe there's some buzz building towards that being one of the top 3 picks as we've kind of circled back to that. But I'm with you. I think that with the NFL draft, it's sort of like, you put together a Christmas list and you have your wish list and you have these things that you want. And there's this frustrating element of like, okay, well, you could have your gifts spoiled before the draft and basically know what you're getting, right? Okay, yeah, we're getting Hampton, we're getting Mason Taylor, or we're getting the Ohio State guys. For some people, that's kind of dull because it's like, I know what I'm getting. Or maybe you get something and you're like, oh, I wanted that pair. I wanted a pair of shoes, but not that pair of shoes, right? I have my heart set on this one. So I get that aspect of the draft where we develop favorites and we kind of get, like you said, that prospect fatigue. By the way, Elic Iomanor. That's how you pronounce it. I've looked it up. I looked up the phonetics. Elic Iomanor. That's how you say it. So if the Broncos draft him, we'll know how to say it when he comes aboard the roster.
Do you remember the Broncos all pronunciation draft from, I think it was 2020. What was it?
Yeah.
Albert Okwuegbunam, Justin Sternad, Michael Ojemudia. Like it was, that was a whole lot, man. McTelvin Agim.
Yeah, they put us to the test that year.
Oh,
that was tough. Yeah, we got spoiled in the first 2 rounds with Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, and then it was like a free for all of, are you going to be able to pronounce this guy's name? You might not. So, but yeah, I'm with you. I think prospect fatigue is a real thing, and it's kind of like having your gift spoiled a month before Christmas. It's like, all right, well, yeah, that was exciting a month ago, but now we had to wait this long, and it's like I was kind of maybe hoping for a little spice, something, I don't know, but yeah, it's tough this time of year when we get this close to the draft.
Yeah, no, and it's also like, does it lose the value to it, right? Like if we've been beating home this drum that it's this one guy in round number 1 happens to be the guy, is the excitement level still there for the fan base, essentially? Because I think you and I have been pretty consistent in who we'd take in round 1. Like you and I have been on the board of Omarion Hampton, Emeka Egbuka, Travion Henderson, Colston Loveland. Like, we've kind of been okay with the same few names at this point. I don't think those names would necessarily shock or like lessen the value or like, oh, we got this guy. Okay, we knew it all along. Versus, I think the situation we talked about earlier, if Denver added a cornerback in round number 1, that might throw everyone for an entire loop here in Broncos country. But I mean, obviously, Sayre, the NFL draft is almost here. We can almost get through the mock draft fatigue that is coming up. You know, I know a lot of Broncos fans are feeling that already because they've done probably 5,000 mock drafts themselves. But the real thing is coming next week. We'll have complete reaction to it. And obviously, Broncos country. Thursday, we're going to hear from George Paton, Sean Payton, and their pre-draft press conference. You'll get complete coverage and reaction here from myself and Sayre, obviously on Friday's episode of Locked On Broncos. But yeah, we just want to know what you think of today's episode of the show. Your thoughts on Field Yates' 3-round mock draft that he put together over there at ESPN.com. But with that said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the show. Broncos country, tomorrow's episode, you know it's Thursday, so you know what that means. Takes on Takes Thursday. Send us your takes. We'll react to the best ones on tomorrow's episode of the show. Broncos country, we'll see you then. Appreciate you for rocking with us.